Hi, Alan Hadley with My Photo Networks. Thanks for joining me for this next video tutorial on the 5 basics of photography. What we're going to explore in this video tutorial are the 5 elements that make up all photography. Every time you pick your camera up and go out and shoot, you're utilizing these 5 elements, but do you really realize that you're using these 5 elements, and do you understand how they apply to the work that you're creating? What we're going to discuss in this video tutorial is each one of these 5. We're going to look in depth at each one and try to create some level of understanding so that you can utilize these every time you go out and shoot and make the most of every image. So with that said, let's get started. The first element of the 5 is light. Without light, we as photographers can't do what we do. So what we have to understand is how light affects what we're shooting. There's all different types of qualities of light, and understanding these qualities of light is very important to accomplishing your goal or creating the image that you want to create. So for a moment, let's talk about qualities of light. You have a lot of different types of light at different times of the day and different times of the year. Light can be very, very hard, or it can be extremely soft. In just a few seconds, we're going to take a look at some examples of different types of light, and I'll explain the different qualities of light as we're looking at these images. So let's do that.
In this first image, we're looking at a very low or soft quality of light. Because the light is actually very low in the sky, it's cascading across the elements that are in the image, creating a tremendous amount of depth. In this next example of quality of light, the fog actually subdues the lighting and flattens the light out quite a bit. But if you'll notice, there's actually good shadow detail and shadow content within our image because of the position and the perspective we were shooting at. So this quality of light is more of a subdued type light. In this next example of quality of light, the lighting is very harsh, or it's a high key type of quality of light. So what we're doing is actually silhouetting our subject, and that quality of light is creating the silhouette. In this next example of quality of light, a harder light source is utilized to create the image, and you can tell the actual direction of the light source by the shadow within the image.
The next element in our group of 5 is subject. Now, understand that choosing a good subject to photograph is obviously very important, but what's more important is how that light is affecting that subject. So not only choosing a good subject, but choosing good light is very important in creating a great image. So let's take a look at a few images and talk about how the light is affecting these individual subjects.
We chose this particular subject because of the direction and the quality of light that was affecting this subject. It's a very hard backlight scenario. This subject was chosen because of the elements within the subject itself. The old mill, the waterfall, the color of the water, and the position of the tree made this a very interesting photograph. But the way the light's affecting this subject is what makes the image what it is. In this landscape shot, the subject was actually chosen because of the quality of light that was affecting the subject, the angle of light that was affecting the subject, and the elements within the image itself.
The third element is perspective. The perspective that we actually choose to shoot a specific subject under a specific lighting is very, very important because it actually illustrates the image that we see in our mind's eye. So that perspective that you choose can make or break an image. Let's take a look at a couple of different images from different perspectives, and we'll talk about those.
In this image, the perspective was very important. It's a very low angle shooting across the top of the rock, but yet it's more to the right of the rock shooting down the beach line. This gave us a very strong sense of depth. Obviously, our horizon is playing a large part of that depth perception. In this image, the perspective is more looking up at the image because we wanted to show the light, but we also wanted to show all of that good color behind the light that was in the sky. In this image, our perspective is from the top. Rather than shooting on an angle or into the image, we wanted to show the water droplets and use them as part of the photo design.
Our next element is composition. Without good quality composition and understanding the rule of thirds, a photograph will just look bland. What we're going to talk about in this next section and illustrate is how composition plays a huge role in the final look and feel of your image.
When we start talking about composition, we're actually talking about the placement of the elements within the frame of your camera. Where you place these elements will make all the difference in how the actual outcome of that image will be. Composition is what makes your image interesting. The perspective that you use to create your composition is what brings the viewer into the image. Utilizing the rule of thirds whenever we're actually composing our image is really important. The rule of thirds is simply the placement of the elements within the frame and creating a composition that brings the viewer into the image rather than just a flat, lifeless image.
The last element of the 5 is exposure. Understanding how to acquire your exposure under any lighting situation is critical to creating the image that you see. Understanding how the exposure works and how you can manipulate that exposure makes all the difference in the outcome of your image. Let's take a look at a few different types of exposures and talk about those.
To create this image, we had to use a very fast shutter speed, but our depth of field didn't really matter because our subject was so far away. So we used a shallower depth of field, around f8. So what we wanted to accomplish with this image is to acquire all of the color and still retain our sharpness. As simple as this image looks, it's actually a little more complicated. Because of the time of the morning that we were actually shooting this image, we opted to go to a much longer exposure, about 1.5 seconds. We also went with a much deeper f-stop, f22. That 1.5 seconds at f22 did a couple of things for us. It actually retained the color saturation and it gave us a level of sharpness that we otherwise wouldn't have had. We were shooting with a much longer focal length lens, which meant that we had to retain as much sharpness as we possibly could. In this image, we wanted to do a couple of different things. We wanted to be able to show the entire scene, which required us to shoot with a shorter focal length lens. It was a 17mm. But we also wanted to have good sharpness throughout the actual image. With the truck actually moving toward us on a highway, we wanted to go with a much faster shutter speed to be able to stop the action.
Those are the 5 elements of all photography: light, subject, perspective, composition, and exposure. Now that you've had an opportunity to actually view this video, what I encourage you to do is rewind it, start over, and look at the images, remembering those 5 elements, and find those 5 elements within each image that's presented in the video. When you're out photographing your images, remember these 5 elements and utilize them specifically so that you can create the images that you want to create. Thanks for joining me for this video tutorial. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and I'll be glad to help.